A man in black car is circling your home every night. The truth behind it will leave you speechless. Archangel Michael says the night has been whispering your name, and the wheels you hear outside are not merely rubber on road but a sign written in motion. He says the circle is not random, it is a message drawn in asphalt, returning to the same point as if tracing a symbol you have not yet learned to read. He says listen closely now, because everything is about to reveal itself, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You first noticed the black car on the third evening, a shadow gliding past your curtains at the very moment the kettle sighed. It did not stop, only drifted by, as if the street itself were a dark river and it a silent boat. You told yourself it was nothing, but the body knows what the mind tries to ignore. By the fifth night, your heart began to keep its own vigil, beating stronger at the hour the engine purred. There were no headlights aimed at your window, no honking, no threat you could point to. Just the same circle, the same phantom arc, the same quiet promise of a story still locked. You tried to memorize the rhythm of those wheels, a metronome for something you could not name. The car moved like it knew your house from another lifetime, slowing at the corner where your mailbox leans, then vanishing down the bend that divides the pine trees. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if not to interrupt. You turned off your lamps and watched from the thin crack between curtain and wall. The street lamp caught a glint of chrome, a ripple of glass, the outline of a driver who never turned their head. The mystery settled in your living room like fog. Your phone screen reflected your face, a pale lighthouse in the dark. You typed and erased the same message to a friend, unsure how to say, "I feel watched," without sounding dramatic. The backspace key felt like a life raft you kept throwing and reeling back. The first fear was small, the size of a nail paring, easy to misplace. By the seventh night, it had grown into a ring you could wear around your chest, a too-tight band that kept your breath short. And yet, you did nothing, because doing nothing felt like safety pretending to be wisdom. On the eighth night, the car didn't come, and the absence felt louder than the engine ever had. You pressed your ear to the window and listened to the kind of silence that makes you remember your own pulse. Relief arrived like a stranger bearing gifts you weren't sure you could accept. Archangel Michael says the silence was not a mercy, it was a test. He says gaps are doorways, and what we fail to ask rushes through them first. He says when the road goes quiet, destiny is looking for a pen. You slept with one eye open, and morning came like a rumor you had already heard. Coffee tasted different, as if it had learned what you learned in the night. Nothing is ordinary once it is named. You stared at the driveway, counting the oil stains like constellations. That afternoon, a single crow landed on the mailbox and tilted its head at your window. It felt like punctuation, a black comma pausing the sentence of your day. Even the leaves rehearsed their part, clapping softly like an audience in the wings. At dusk, the car returned, and time folded the way it does when déjà vu enters the room. You recognized the curve, the slow drift, the way the driver's hands did not fidget. You didn't know this person, and yet your bones insisted you did. In the back seat, something shifted, no larger than a shoebox, no louder than a prayer. The motion was gentle, the way memory moves when you finally look at it. Your breath hung in the air, a ghost waiting to be named. You pressed your palm against the cool glass and felt the world press back. The car circled once, twice, 3 times, then paused at the stop sign you've never fully trusted. It idled there, the tailpipe releasing small gray promises that vanished before they touched the ground. Your front door creaked as the night cooled, the house settling into its familiar bones. The living room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old pages, as if the past had been dusted but not removed. You stood in that doorway and decided to count the passes. Pass 1, your heartbeat matched the tires. Pass 2, the lamps across the street flickered, then steadied, as if remembering their cue. Pass 3, a moth tapped your window and stayed. On the 4th pass, the driver's window rolled down a few inches. You could not see the eyes, only the silhouette and the suggestion of a jaw set with meaning. The engine quieted to a purr you felt more than heard. You went to the hallway closet and found the shoebox where you keep stray keys. The label from a decade ago still clung to the lid, ghosting a name in faded ink. You didn't open it, not yet, but the weight of that cardboard felt newly important. Archangel Michael says the past does not knock. It returns by driving the block until you admit the road belongs to you. He says objects remember, and some memories buy gasoline. He says you will know the difference between fear and warning when the doorbell rings once and never again. The doorbell rang once and never again. The sound was clean, a single drop in a bowl of still water. You felt the circle complete itself. You walked to the door and did not turn on the porch light. Between frame and night, the car idled at the curb, its shape a folded map. You opened the door and leaned into the threshold like a sailor tasting wind. A man stepped from the driver's seat, dressed in black that did not eat the light but arranged it. He kept his hands visible, open, fingers spread as if he arrived to carry weight, not add it. When he spoke, the voice carried that strange quality of name said backwards. "Good evening," he said, and the words were an old key trying new teeth. "I believe I have something that belongs to you." You did not answer, not with your mouth. He reached into the back seat and lifted a box wrapped in brown paper, corners blunt from travel. No labels, no stamps, only a single twine bow tied with care. He held it like a bridge between 2 houses. "I have circled," he said, "because the time for delivery belongs to the house more than to me." The statement lodged in your chest like a small bird turning. You nodded, as if you had been expecting this grammar all along. He did not step onto your porch, did not cross the invisible fence that separates intention from trespass. He set the box at the edge where shadow meets step. The engine kept purring, as if impatient with ceremony. "Who are you?" you asked, and the question sounded like a coat you had not worn in years. He smiled with the sadness of someone who keeps their promises. "Someone who promised a friend," he said. The word friend opened a door behind your eyes. It let in the scent of summers older than photographs, the snap of screen doors, the bell of your mother's laughter. It let in your father's handwriting, the kind that always leaned forward like it couldn't wait to meet you. You knelt and touched the twine. It was warm, as if it had sat near a window that knew the sun by its first name. Your fingers remembered the way your father tied packages, 2 loops, a cross, a pull that spoke of trust. The man gestured toward the box with a smaller nod. He said you'd know by the knot, he murmured, as if reading your thoughts from the fog of breath between you. He said you'd hesitate exactly this long. Your throat tightened like a fist closed around a photograph. You looked up, but the man was not watching you. He was watching the street, as if listening for a chorus only he could hear. Why the circles? You asked, softer now. Because grief moves in circles, he said. Because roads remember, and promises keep time. The explanation lifted your fear and set it down somewhere it could not find you. You untied the twine, and the knot surrendered like it had been waiting for your hands. Inside the brown paper was a wooden box, sanded smooth, the color of rain-wet walnut. The lid bore a tiny brass plaque engraved with your name, and beneath it, a date you had never told anyone meant the world to you. Your fingers trembled as you lifted the lid and the living room filled with a scent you could not mistake, your father's aftershave, the one he wore on Sundays and on the days he told you secrets. Inside lay a stack of envelopes bound with a ribbon the color of dusk. On top rested a small black journal no larger than your palm. You opened the first envelope and found a letter written months before he passed, ink sloping forward with his never-ending hurry to reach you. He spoke in the present tense, as if he had figured out how to keep speaking even after the world closed his mouth. He told you about the things he could not say in the kitchen, the way he hid fear in jokes, the way he watched you from the doorway and decided you were braver than you knew. Tears arrived without the drama you expected, simple as rain collecting where the land dips. The man in black did not avert his eyes or stare. He stood like a guard at a gate that only opens once. The car idled, a metronome set to a heartbeat that oddly matched your own. You turned the journal pages and found maps of the neighborhood hand-drawn with dates, circles, little annotations in your father's shorthand. Here, where you scraped your knee at 7. There, where you learned to ride away and then back again. On the last page, a note: if you're reading this, the circle is complete. You are ready. Ready for what? You whispered, and the question felt permissible now, like a line finally rehearsed. The man in black stepped closer to the edge of the porch without crossing it, ready to receive what he left. Where the road bends, he said. He pointed down the block to the corner where the oak roots make the asphalt ripple. For years you joked the city would never fix that bend because it belonged to the tree, not the street. He asked me to drive until you opened the door, the man continued. He said you would open it the night you recognized the knot. You glanced again at the letters, at your name in your father's hand, and a laughter rose from the floorboards like heat. Not a laughter of joy, not yet, but of relief, of weight returning to the earth from the air. You nodded and closed the box. Come, the man said, and the word was simple and unafraid. He lifted the box as if it were light, but you knew it wasn't, not in the ways that mattered. You followed him to the curb, and the car accepted the two of you without judgment. The seat smelled of cedar and something like old paper, something like a library that had learned to breathe. You fastened your seatbelt with hands that had stopped shaking. The night pressed its cool cheek to the windows like a friend who didn't need to talk. As the car rolled forward, every tree you had ever counted leaned in to watch. The street expanded, the way a hallway does in a dream just before a door opens. The man kept both hands at 10 and 2, and the engine hummed like a choir on the note before the song begins. When you reached the bend, he slowed until the world felt suspended. There, nestled against the base of the oak where the asphalt cracked, sat a small metal marker you had never noticed. It was no bigger than a book plate, engraved with 3 words that belonged to the first story your father ever told you. The man parked and killed the engine, and the world listened to itself for a moment. You stepped out, carrying the box that now felt not heavy but full. The night air smelled of damp bark and the cold warmth of iron. You knelt by the marker and brushed away the thin skin of dirt that had gathered. Beneath it, a recessed handle revealed itself, cunningly disguised as part of the plaque. You looked to the man, and he gave a single, gentle nod. With a soft pull, the square of earth lifted like a lid, revealing a shallow cavity lined in cedar. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay another box, this one older, with hinges that sighed like a porch swing. You unwrapped it carefully, the way you unwrap a story you are finally ready to hold. Inside was a stack of cassette tapes. Labeled in your father's shorthand, a tiny tape player, fresh batteries, and a folded page that said only, "Drive with him." Your mouth opened in a small O of surprise that quickly turned into a smile. You had not seen a cassette in years, and yet your hands remembered exactly how to press them into the player until they clicked home. Back in the car, the man sat quietly while you loaded the first tape. You pressed play, and your father's voice filled the car the way dawn fills a room, slowly, wholly, with no apology. He greeted you by name and told you to breathe. Right now, he said on the tape, I imagine you in the passenger seat, the way you used to be when we counted mailboxes and made up rhymes for street names. The man in black glanced over, a polite smile that belonged to someone entrusted with ceremony. If he cries, your father's voice continued, let him. He knew me. He knows you. And he knows the route. The car began to move again, the tape guiding each turn with a familiarity that made your eyes ache. Left at the park where you lost your favorite scarf. Right past the store with the bell that rings like a memory of winter. Straight through the intersection where you learned a person can be brave and afraid at once. Your father's voice told stories you didn't know he'd kept. He spoke of the day you were born and the way he waited in a hallway, folding and unfolding the paper that would later become your first paper plane. He spoke of the night he sat outside your bedroom door, listening to you breathe as if every inhale were a small blessing and every exhale a promise. The man in black drove the circle again and again, the route expanding, not in distance, but in depth. Each pass revealed a layer, each turn a memory you had misplaced. The night did not tire, it brightened, as if the moon had decided to stay and watch. By the fifth tape, you understood. The circles were not for you to fear, they were for you to remember. Your father had built a map inside the neighborhood and sewn your childhood into it, stitch by revving stitch. At the seventh stop, the tape asked the driver to pull over by the old brick wall where ivy grows like script. Open the glove compartment, your father said, and hand my child the envelope inside. The man did as asked, and there it was, a fresh envelope with your name in a hand you knew before you knew your own. Inside, you found a deed, not to a house, but to a tree. The oak, the one with roots like time itself, was yours now, legally and symbolically, an heirloom rooted The street will go on being a street, bearing the ordinary holiness of garbage days and mail routes and children's chalk drawings. But you will see the hidden ink, the map superimposed by love and kept alive by motion. You will know how to walk it when the day frays. And on certain evenings, when the kettle sighs and the window reflects your face, you will take out one letter at random and let a voice you thought you lost speak again. It won't hurt like before. It will land like rain on a field that learned to wait. What was once a question will have become a path. You will sleep with both eyes closed and wake to a room that forgot how to clutch at shadows. The box will sit where boxes should, not as a shrine but as a friend who doesn't always need to talk. The circle will continue, not on the street, but in the way your life returns to what matters and then sets out again. If an engine ever hums outside at the late hour again, you will smile instead of tense. You will step to the window and bless whoever needs to drive their promise to someone else's door. You will understand the liturgy of tires and turns. The truth behind the black car did not ask for belief, it asked for listening. It asked for a door opened once and a life opened often. It asked for you to receive what had been kept safe in motion. Tonight, the house is quiet in the right ways, and the street holds no secrets from you. The oak is awake, the sapling, too, learning how to translate wind. And you, at last, are not being watched, you are being kept. If you wish to express your support further, you have the option to give super thanks, with contributions of up to $20. The following morning arrived honest and light, as if the sky had been washed and hung to dry. You stood with your mug on the porch and counted the tiny new creases in the sapling's leaves, each one a small oath to grow. The street that once felt like a boundary now looked like a ribbon you could tie to anything you chose to keep. You brought the wooden box to the table and arranged the envelopes by weight and sound, because paper has both when love is inside it. Some crackled like winter fires, some sighed like curtains on a slow afternoon. You chose one that felt steady in your hands and opened it the way one opens a door to a room they already know. Your father wrote about the first time you asked him how the moon follows the car at night. He described the rearview mirror and your small finger pointing, and how he learned to answer not with science but with story. Because it loves the circle, he had said then, and now again, as if he had replaced the sky with an idea he knew you'd need later. Later that day, you found the courage to clean the hallway closet where the shoebox had slept for years. Dust lifted in motes, spinning like small galaxies rearranging themselves into new maps. Beneath a stack of old calendars, you discovered a brown envelope with a name that made your breath loosen, the neighbor who watered your houseplants when everything felt too heavy. Inside was a note your father had written to her, never sent, thanking her for saving your family from arguments that might have run too long. A crisp bill was folded inside with a single instruction: buy flowers for the Bend. You smiled, imagining her delighted chaos at the florist, choosing petals that could hold a street. You did not wait. You walked to her porch and knocked, holding the letter like a bridge. She opened the door and blinked hard when you told her what you had found. The two of you stood on the walk with armfuls of marigolds and jasmine and made a small parade of color to the bend by the oak. Together you planted the blooms in a crescent under the tree, leaving a bright comma in the grammar of asphalt and root. Cars slowed, not out of worry but wonder, and you felt the neighborhood collect around the moment like hands around a candle. Not a memorial, not exactly, more a promise disguised as petals. That evening, you listened to another tape. Your father's voice carried a soft crackle, and you imagined the cassette winding like a small river inside its plastic banks. "Tonight," he said, "let the driver take you to the place where you first wanted to leave and then chose to stay." Mercy pulled up to a narrow lane where paint flaked from old fences, the kind of peeling that tells the truth about weather and time. You remembered standing here years ago with a suitcase of more plans than clothes, convinced you had to go to find yourself. Your father had stood 3 paces behind you, saying nothing, letting the air choose your side. The tape did not try to rewrite that night. It let it be what it had been, hard, honest, yours. A circle, your father said, is not a trap. It is a way to see the same place with a different heart. You closed your eyes and noticed how your breathing had changed since the first nights of the black car. In the earth and in your story. A note clipped to the deed read, "When the wind moves through it, assume I'm saying hello." You laughed and cried at the same time, that precise flavor of feeling you once thought impossible. The man in black tapped the steering wheel lightly, a small rhythm of satisfaction. He wanted you to have something that would outlive both of you, he said, voice soft and sure. Archangel Michael says the truth rarely arrives in uniforms you expect. He says some messengers dress in threats to get you to open the door, but the envelopes they carry are medicine, not poison. He says the man in the black car completed a vow that began the night your father learned how to love without needing to be seen. The final tape was short, no longer than a lullaby. Your father thanked you for opening the door on a night when fear could have kept it shut. He asked you to take the circles when life feels square, to drive the block until the road inside you bends again toward what matters. When the tape clicked off, the man parked at your curb, and the silence felt like a blanket finally warmed. He turned toward you for the first time in full, and his face was kind in the way of people who have carried fragile things. He made me promise that when you understood, would tell you my name, he said. You waited, and he let the night hold the pause. My name is Mercy, he said simply. The word did not surprise you. It fit him the way a sleeve fits an arm that has long carried. He opened the trunk and lifted a small tree sapling bundled in burlap, the kind that waits patiently for a yard to call it home. Together you planted it near the porch, where the morning sun likes to start its work. The soil received it with that soft, muffled sound earth makes when it remembers itself. When you stood, your hands were dirty and your heart was clean. The car had ceased to be a threat and had become a ritual, a vehicle for a promise that turned fear into a route back to love. You looked at the street and understood why it had felt like a river. Mercy placed his keys on his palm and closed his fingers around them, a quiet seal on the story. You won't see me circle again, he said, and the sentence did not bruise. But you will feel the road keep its vow. You nodded and hugged the wooden box to your chest, the letters inside like a second heartbeat. The night loosened, the stars returning to their original task of looking like distant cities. The porch light clicked on by its own timer, and for the first time in many nights, you did not flinch. Back inside, you arranged the letters on your table and placed the journal atop the stack, a compass pointing inward. The kettle sang, ordinary and holy in the same breath. You poured your tea and watched steam braid itself with the soft draughts of home. The black car rolled away without a farewell, which was its farewell. It did not need to announce itself anymore, did not need to draw circles for your attention. The route now lived in you. In the following days, the oak began to greet you differently, leaves catching small sunlight and shaking it loose like laughter. Neighbors asked about the new sapling, and you found yourself smiling in ways that didn't hide anything. The mailbox, once a witness to passing fear, became a stage for small blessings, the kind that arrive in stamped envelopes and unasked kindness. When you sat down to write your thank you letter to a man named Mercy whose surname you never learned, your handwriting surprised you with its steadiness. You did not send it, you planted it, tucked under the burlap at the sapling's base. Some gratitude grows best when watered from below. And at the end of that week, while sorting the last of the envelopes, you found a small scrap of paper stuck to the bottom of the box. On it, in your father's hand, was a sentence that felt like a door closing softly after everyone has come home. When a car circles, it read, "Make a circle bigger inside you." Archangel Michael says you did. He says the truth did not break you, it returned you. He says the road is yours now. Drive it when you need to remember who waited for you at the bend. You stood on the porch at dusk and listened, not for engines, but for the quiet mechanics of a world reassembling. Leaves clicked, crickets tuned, the sky hinged itself to a deeper blue. Somewhere a child laughed, and you answered without words. The fear that once sat in your chest like a locked room had been repainted, refurnished, renamed. It had a window now, and a view of a tree that belonged to you. The night no longer watched you, it accompanied you. In time, people will ask about the man in the black car, and you will say his name and mean the word. You will tell them how promises sometimes need to be driven to our doors. You will tell them that the truth behind the circling was not a hunter, but a shepherd. Fear had narrowed it back then, planting a metronome in your ribs that only knew one song. Now your breath felt like a door that could open from either side. Archangel Michael says what you revisit returns the favor. He says if you offer the road your footsteps without resentment, it will give you back a version of yourself you thought you lost. He says the thing you feared was the messenger carrying the key to the room you kept locked. On the third evening of the new week, you chose to drive. Mercy handed you the keys with a bow of quiet ceremony, as if knighthood could be conferred by trust instead of sword. The leather felt used but faithful, holding the shape of all the miles it had ever witnessed. You started the engine and the familiar hum rose like a phrase you finally understood. The car did not lunge, it yielded. You guided it along the circle, not to check for danger, but to greet an inheritance that did not come wrapped in land or locks but in route and rhythm. Halfway through the first lap, you noticed a stray dog trotting purposefully along the sidewalk, ears perked as if listening for the same voice captured on your tapes. You slowed, and the dog glanced toward you with recognition that startled you into laughter. Mercy opened the back door without a word, and the dog jumped in, relieved to have been invited where it was already arriving. You pressed play. Your father described a morning you had forgotten, a spill of cereal that led to a cascade of laughter large enough to drown a bad day. He described the way the dog you had then pressed its head against your shin when you cried, asking for nothing but proximity. By the fourth lap, clouds had thinned to leave a ceiling of bare stars, simple and precise. Houses breathed. Somewhere a child practiced scales on a piano, getting them wrong in the way that teaches the right better than perfection would. The dog's head found your shoulder from the back seat, and a warmth spread through the car that no heater could claim. You turned where the tape told you to turn and stopped where it told you to stop. Each pause returned a small artifact to you, a pocket watch tucked beneath the gutter's lip, a rolled blueprint inside the hollow of a fence post, a Polaroid sealed in a jar beneath the rhododendron that had been your mother's pride. None of it was money in the way banknotes counted, but all of it was wealth. The blueprint took your breath differently. It showed a bench designed to arc along the sidewalk at the oak, careful about roots, generous about shade. Your father had sketched notes in the margins, for waiting with each other, for conversations that need to be held in the open air. You printed the plans the next morning and brought them to the city office. You expected resistance wrapped in forms and waiting rooms, but what you found instead was a clerk who had known your father as the man who always returned pens with new ink. She read the notes, looked at you, and said, "We've been waiting for someone to bring this." A week later, a small group gathered at the bend. The bench arrived in pieces, wood warm to the touch, bolts shining like tiny affirmations. Mercy brought a tool bag, and the neighbors brought sweet tea and the kind of cookies that crumble softly into the palm of a child's hand. As you worked, stories surfaced that you had not known were living in the houses around you. A teenager told you your father once taught him how to tie a tie before a school ceremony he was sure he'd fail to attend. The mail carrier said your father insisted rain be greeted, not endured. The woman who lived 2 doors down said he always returned her empty casserole dishes with slices of pie inside. The bench took shape, and with it, a small tradition. People began to wave when they circled, not out of habit but recognition, like ships saluting a lighthouse that had learned to sit down. The dog, now yours by consent and affection, claimed the spot under the bench where shade fell first and stayed longest. Archangel Michael says memory is not a museum, it is a workshop. He says you are building something with what you were given, and the sound you hear is the old wood finding new uses. He says a truth that once frightened you has been hired by your future to carry the heavy end of the beam. You return to the tapes on a rainy afternoon when the sky forgot about edges. The 7th cassette had a different tone, and you sensed its weight even before you pressed play. There was no route this time, only a voice that felt closer than it should have, as if your father had moved his chair across an impossible room. He spoke about the leaving he could not control, not with jokes, not with secrets, not with stubbornness shaped into hope. He said he had wanted to do the ordinary thing, hold on, but had learned the braver thing was to make sure you would find your way after the holding was done. He admitted to mistakes without asking you to forgive them. Trusting the circle to finish what apologies begin. You let the rain be the applause after that confession. It tapped the windows as if reminding you that glass only pretends to separate one world from another. The dog lifted its head to watch your face and then lay down again, as if satisfied by your tears' honest temperature. In the evening, Mercy arrived with a paper bag crinkling around 2 bowls of soup and a loaf of bread that smelled like reunion. He set them on the counter the way people do when they have made a habit of feeding others in their grief and their joy alike. "Today," he said gently, "you changed something without moving a single piece of furniture. You ate at the table where the letters lived, and Mercy told you a little more about his circles. He was a messenger by calling more than by job, driven by promises people made at hospital beds and in quiet kitchens with the clock refusing to hurry. He said he had driven boxes to doorsteps where no one could bear to open them alone, and he had waited in idling cars for as long as it took for the doors to open at last. How many? You asked, not because numbers mattered but because magnitude sometimes grants us awe. Enough, he said, smiling into his soup. And not enough. There is always more to carry. You found sleep easily that night, the kind that does not bargain with fear or future. In your dream, the circle was a spiral, lifting by a small degree with every lap until it opened into a clear view of the city and the river that wrote its first stories. When you woke, the dream left a simple instruction on your tongue: keep driving until the view changes. Days slipped into a patient rhythm, and you returned to work with a steadiness that surprised even the way your chair greeted you. You answered emails without adding urgency where none belonged. You kept a tape player in the top drawer like a talisman that worked by reminding you how voices can survive distance. One evening, just before the sun considered how it would exit, another car slowed in front of your house. For a brief second, an old reflex lifted its head in your chest, but it settled almost at once, like a dog remembering this is home. The car idled, then parked, then shut off, its stillness the punctuation you had learned to read. A woman stepped out, carrying a shoebox wrapped in a scarf the color of calm. She looked around as if trying to match the house she saw with a house she had known only in stories. When she reached the porch, her face unfolded into recognition that found your name before your mouth offered it. "I've been told to find you," she said, and her voice rode on the edge of laughter and relief, as if both had been waiting their turn and decided to arrive together. "Your father kept letters for my mother, too. He asked me to deliver them when the road felt safe again." The two of you sat on the bench and shared the kind of silence that is full rather than empty. She told you stories of afternoons at the clinic where your father volunteered behind a desk that needed more kindness than paperclips. She told you he kept a box labeled "Promises in Transit," and how he'd grin when calling her his southbound courier when her route took her past the river. You opened the shoebox together and found letters folded like small boats, ready to be placed on whatever water needed them most. Some were addressed to people you'd never met, some had only first names, trusting the hand that carried them to know the hearts they were meant for. "We keep circles," she said, and the phrase felt both humble and heroic at once. "Archangel Michael says what you accept you can now deliver. He says you became what you watched, the patient arc, the faithful return, the quiet proof that love can navigate by landmarks nobody bothered to list on maps. He says your new work is not to be busy, but to be precise." That precision took shape in small ways. You learned to listen for the hour a porch is most likely to open. You learned which houses want you to knock and which prefer you to leave the box with a note that says, "When ready." You learned to start the engine gently and to let it rest without hurry. When you drove other circles, you did not lose yours. You passed your own house sometimes on your new routes, and the sight of the bench and the sapling steadied your steering hand. The dog knew the pattern and claimed the back seat like a seasoned co-captain, watching for the landmarks your father had taught you to trust. One late afternoon, as the city dressed itself for evening, Mercy climbed into the passenger seat and handed you a small envelope addressed in his own spare handwriting. "From me," he said, as if apologizing for the insertion of himself into a chain designed for others. "You don't need to open it now." You did not. You slid it into the glove compartment with the other things that wait well: insurance cards, a pen that never dries out. Inside was a single page with a circle drawn in pencil, the line sure but soft. At the center, he had written 5 words: "You kept the vow alive." On the back, a single line: "If you ever need someone to drive, you know who to ask." You leaned your head against the steering wheel and smiled into the dark. The car did not need to move to feel like motion. It held, and holding is a kind of travel too. The sapling rustled approval against the windshield, casting small leaf shadows that moved like handwriting across your hands. The next morning, your neighborhood newsletter featured a photo of the bench beneath the oak, flowers bright at its feet, dog asleep in the shade like punctuation at the end of a good sentence. The caption named it, "The Bend," capitalized now, a proper noun born from shared use. No one mentioned your father by name, and you loved that even more. The gift had become part of the street's grammar. You still play the tapes, not because you need them to continue breathing, but because breathing with company is different than breathing alone. Sometimes you fall asleep midway through a story you've heard 3 times already, and you wake to find the dog has nudged paws with its nose, as if to keep the last sentence safe for sharing. There are nights when the road calls you with no address attached. You answer, and you find someone you didn't expect to find, a person arranging their fear into rows like books that won't stay upright. You sit with them in the front seat while the engine hums, and together you learn again how to name the colors of dawn. When you return home on those nights, you thank the street without words. You place a hand on the bench as you pass, a small, quiet ritual that never asks for attention. You look up at the oak and listen for the hello that arrives in a tremble of leaves even when the air is still. Archangel Michael says the truth behind the black car was simple and vast: a vow on wheels, a heart with a route, a father who made sure the door you feared would one day open to your own courage. He says you did not simply discover it, you became part of it. He says the circle that once encircled your house now encircles your days, and that is the shape of peace that knows how to move. And when someone asks, as they will, weren't you afraid when a black car circled your home every night, you will not perform bravery or rehearse a script. You will tell them what happened, exactly. And you will watch their shoulders drop as they imagine their own road learning to carry instead of chase. You will offer them a ride when they are ready. The man in the black car does not circle anymore because you do. Not from fear, not from habit, but from intention grown tender and strong. The road holds you like an old friend who remembers your first and middle names and the nickname only your father used. On some evenings, Mercy sits on the bench with you, and the two of you count nothing in particular until the numbers turn into laughter. He tells you about a town across the river where a circle turned into a fair, and a porch that turned into a choir, and a promise that learned to keep itself. You tell him about the way the dog has started to recognize the front steps where tears are about to end. You have no final tape, no last page, no lid closing forever. What you have is a loop that lifts, a route that renews itself by use, a truth that keeps arriving without making a spectacle of its entrance. The sky above your street does not try to be clever, it just keeps changing colors until you call it beautiful out loud. On the night that marks a quiet year since the first circle, you bring a lantern to the bend and place it at the bench's feet. Neighbors gather without needing to be asked, and someone plays a guitar that only knows how to be kind. A child asks if the dog can wear a small ribbon, and you say yes, because why would you ever say no to light? You sit, and you breathe, and you do not look for an engine. To the soft thud of a ball bumping a palm, to the leaf applause from the tree you own and the street you share. When you close your eyes, your father's voice is not a recording. It is the way your own voice now sounds when you speak to someone who's almost ready to open their door. The truth behind the car is not a secret anymore. It lives in a bench and a sapling and a deed tucked inside a folder labeled not important, but used often. It lives in an engine that starts gently, and in a pause that touches the doorbell only once. And it lives in you, in the way your hand reaches for the keys when the evening changes temperature by a single honest degree. Archangel Michael says keep going. He says don't rush, don't stall, just move the way truth moves, faithful and quiet, returning until the door opens and the life inside recognizes itself. He says the street knows your name, and you know the streets, and that is enough to keep the vow whole.